This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
Transport Canada does not know to what extent organizations transporting dangerous goods are complying with regulations. It has given temporary approval to roughly half of the emergency response plans required to transport the most dangerous regulated goods, such as types of ammonia and acids. Temporary approvals are subject to less verification. Some have been in place for 10 years or more. Many of the weaknesses we found in Transport Canada were identified more than 5 years ago and have yet to be fixed. The National Energy Board has not appropriately monitored whether emergency procedure manuals prepared by regulated companies meet established expectations. It has yet to review the manuals of 32 companies. Where it has conducted reviews and identified deficiencies, there was little indication that it followed up to verify that companies have taken corrective action. It is important for Environment Canada to identify and to focus on those science activities that are critical to the Canadian public interest. Few organizations, aside from the federal government, have the capacity to carry out credible, long-term environmental research and monitoring at a national level. In 2007, the Department developed a plan setting out the long-term directions of its science activities. Now, Environment Canada needs to put that plan into practice. A department-wide plan for science is more urgent than ever in this period of fiscal restraint. Environment Canada is missing key information on those it regulates. This information would help it target those organizations whose activities pose the greatest risk of environmental damage as a result of noncompliance. Also, the Department has not followed up on half of its enforcement actions to verify that past violators are now complying with regulations. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is an important part of protecting the health of Canadians and the quality of our environment. I am concerned that shortcomings in key management systems have impeded the effective enforcement of the Act. Environmental monitoring is necessary to know whether the quality of our environment is getting better or worse. The information the government collects serves many users, including municipal planners, resource managers, and Canadian driving down the highway will see trucks and on trains, there'll be warning labels. And what we said is one of the deficiencies that Transport Canada has said that those warning labels are either often incorrect, non-existent, incomplete information. And those are critically important. If there's an accident, it's critically important that particularly first responders, the police, firefighters, are well informed of what the contents of those are. So we found several failings with Transport Canada. Didn't know what the regulated community was, what transporters are. Temporary permits supposed to be there for temporarily. When I think temporary, I think couple of weeks, couple of months. We found one 13 years. And what I would say is, Canadians would certainly be better protected if these regulations were put in place after an incident in Mississauga in the 1980s. It required the evacuation of 200,000 people in Mississauga. These are rare, but nevertheless, on average, about 2 a week in Canada involves an incident or an accident involving the transport of dangerous products. And these are called dangerous because they are. They're explosives, they're sulfuric acid, ammonia. They cause immediate risk to human health, as well as then potentially longer-term environmental threats if they go into waterways and groundwater and others.
Vaughan, let's go back here. The gaps and deficiencies that you signaled, is it a result of a lack of resources? And if it is, do you worry that further cuts could mean more gaps and deficiencies?
Well, I mean, one thing for just to give you some numbers, National Energy Board is responsible for the regulatory oversight of 71,000 kilometers of pipelines in this country. They've got around 65, 68 employees, so that works out to one employee being responsible for 1,000 kilometers or more of pipelines. So they've got problems in terms of the oversight of, one, as I mentioned, inspector goes in, finds a problem, there's no follow-up to see whether those deficiencies are being addressed. And for the NEB in particular, what we noted in this audit is that a large number of pipelines in Canada are 30, 40, 50, some of them are 60 years old. And that's why, going in and making sure those inspections are going as they're supposed to is because when these things get older, then the risk of actually having an accident obviously increases.
So, I mean, is it a lack of resources then that we're seeing all these gaps?
Well, I think we wouldn't comment on resources per se, so that's not what that would be then, I think, for parliamentarians to go and say, we've told Parliament what we said the problems are. We've said that, that there's, that I think they're overstretched. I think in the case of National Energy Board, I think it'd be safe to say that they are overstretched. I think for Transport Canada, it was a different set of issues. I think that that it seemed to, the problems that had been there long-standing hadn't received the attention that I think they warranted. I don't think that was a resource issue. I think that was a management oversight issue. I have a legal mandate to inform Parliament of the progress of the federal government in its progress both against Kyoto as well as to provide a review of its annual climate change plans. So with the announcement of Minister Kent yesterday, we will now have to go back and look at what we will do. But what I will say is that if the Act of Parliament remains the Act of Parliament, meaning the Kyoto Protocol Implementation Act, then we will abide by the law. And so if the Act remains, then we will inform Parliament. And the question will be, how will we do this? We have lawyers looking at this actually right now on what the implications are.
Straight Good News.
Okay, with regards to the Canadian Environmental Act, you said in your 12th statement, I am concerned that the shortcomings in key management systems have impeded the effectiveness of the enforcement of the Act. What shortcomings are you most concerned with?
I'd say probably, I'll give you two. One was, for 16 of the 45 regulations, Environment Canada does not have the proper training. And if you don't have the proper training, then the inspectors aren't able to go in and do what they're required to do to actually see whether or not a law is being followed or it's being broken. And then a second one is a large number of unknown regulatees, meaning they don't know the regulated community, and so you don't know the regulated enterprise. If you don't know, you can't inspect. If you don't inspect, you don't know if something is working or is not working, and you can't go to follow up. So the unknowns are really where it's just a showstopper, because if you don't know, you can't do anything. And so what we've said is there should be more work in terms of closing those gaps in terms of where the regulated community, how much they know and what they don't know.
So when you say incident with pipelines, do you mean a leak, an explosion, anything like that?
So anything. So, incidents can be from something, it's minor, to an explosion, to a leak. There's been, and we have it in the report, there was, small incidents, but there's also Wrigley, Northwest Territories, 200,000 liters. So these are what are reported. Some are, and they go, just for the background in the audit, there's a level 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the severity of the incidents reported.